Besides all the X58 madness going on around the channel, people have asked that I take a look from time to time at the piledriver FX8350. And the reason why I didn't take a look is because I thought it was overpriced, at least when I went to look for deals, until yesterday where I picked up this CPU cooler, an FX8350, and a 970 Extreme 4 motherboard for around about 110 Australian dollars. In USD terms, that's 85 US dollars, which in my opinion is a bargain for all that combination. Now, some of the other parts that we picked up here, we got a GTX 780. This is from EVGA. Now, I did get this for free, but hold on a moment. I know you're probably thinking, oh, you got it donated. No, I actually pulled this out of a $600 PC that I built in the past, where I replaced it with a GTX 1060 and then upsold that. So essentially I made $15 and got this graphics card for free. And the 8GB of memory, I exchanged that for helping someone overclock their X58 motherboard. So I saved them a lot of hassle and a lot of time, and they gave us 8GB of DDR3 memory. Now for the hard drive, we're going with a brand new 1TB from Seagate. This comes in at 58 Australian dollars, or if you're in the US, you can pick these up for around 45 USD, possibly even cheaper since we do pay tax here in Australia. And then the last component is the case. This is a CaseCom case with a 700 watt power supply, although I have tested this power supply in the past, and it is quite decent. It does have strong amperage on the 12 volt line. Got this combination for 75 Australian dollars, which would be about $58 in the US of A. And that brings this whole total of the build to 188 USD, or if you're in Australia, 243 Australian dollars. So we've already got value for money sitting here, but of course, I'm very curious to see how the FX8350 holds up in 2018, especially since I've just tested the Westmere 6-core Xeon, the X5675, and that did extremely well. I'll put the link for the video up here if you want to see that. But we've got a 1TB hard drive. I know some people are going to say this definitely blows out the budget, but in my experience, at least on the Gold Coast, I can't get good hard drives for cheap. The people selling used hard drives, they're literally over like 5 to 7 years old, and at that stage, they're really slow. I wouldn't want to do that when I on-sell a computer to someone. It's just a nightmare when you're trying to boot something up or get games to load when the hard drive's just that slow. So putting in a new hard drive not only saves me a lot of time when I'm doing benchmarks and installing things, but also saves a potential buyer a lot of hassle. But with all that aside, these parts here, although they look pretty clean, they could still use a bit of a touch-up. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Then we're going to install it in the case and see how this thing performs. Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and the first thing we want to do here is take off all these heat sinks and make sure the thermal paste is okay. Even though I'm not going to be hosing this down with brake cleaner because it looks like it doesn't need it, I'm still going to be checking the thermal paste or the thermal pads on all these 4 different heat sinks here. That's just to make sure that everything's running okay, and same with the graphics card as well, because if the thermal paste has gotten really hard and it's crumbed up, it's not going to be doing anywhere near as good as a fresh layer of paste. So we pulled apart the graphics card and the motherboard, and the north bridge here and the south bridge, they are really crusty. They need a thermal paste change desperately. I don't even know what's going on here. It's like this brown paste mixed with silver paste. That really doesn't look good. And then the graphics card here has a patch of thermal paste on it. So I'm glad I pulled all these apart because they could use some Tech Yes loving now, and then we'll put it back together. Here's the build. It is complete, and we had to do some jungle management here. This was really bad. There's just absolutely no cable management options in this case, and because it's a non-modular power supply, It's just got cables everywhere. So all things considered, it's a pretty tight case, pretty flimsy, but everything is sorted out. And one thing we're going to do with this case is actually just leave the side panel off, because if we do put it on, it's going to be a sarcophagus in here. Like, got a GTX 780, FX8350, and where's all that heat going to go? This little fan here, although I'm sure he can do all right, I don't think he's equipped enough to handle the power inside this thing. So now we've got the build, it is running, and you're probably wondering, what is this fan doing? It's actually cooling the VRM. I've tested this, I overclocked it at 4.4 gigahertz, pretty mild overclock, but this is some of the problems that Piledriver faced. The 970 boards especially, the VRMs got way too hot on a lot of them, and they just couldn't handle the FX8350s or even the FX8320s. So I've got a cotton bud sticking this to the case, and that's actually keeping the VRMs just below 100 degrees. Without it, we're going up to 120 degrees. So this is after even just a 5-minute stress test. So looks like we're good to go now. We should be able to stress this at 4.4 gigahertz. Temperature of the CPU is getting to around about 60 degrees, which I think is okay for this platform. Though it is a little bit hot in here. It's 29 degrees at the moment. Ambients are a little bit hot today, but we're just going to finish off copying some files over. I also have run a Cinebench score, and we're getting close to, I think it's 700 points, which is actually not bad. For this little 8-core, especially for the money I paid for it. Single core performance, you guys have been requesting that, got to around about 100 points on the single threaded performance. So I'm curious to boot up some of the same games we were playing with the Westmere X5675 and see how it compares with this. But first off, we'll do it with the GTX 780, and then I'll probably run a comparison for you guys with the 1080 Ti. So just finished testing the rig last night. I actually recorded the outro segment, but I woke up this morning and watched it back, and I looked so grumpy and tired. I was like, no, I'm gonna scrap that, re-record the whole thing. And basically with the FX8350, it is a decent CPU. We saw that in Final Fantasy 15 and also PUBG. It can get up and play those titles. It can do it in practically all the titles we tested here. It was a really good experience, not just 60 FPS, but a lot of times going over 100. And so it's not a bad option if you can pick it up for a good price. Now, some of the problems, of course, is first of all, that 970 chipset. I think AMD should have policed this a lot better in that they shouldn't have enabled the 8 cores or a lot of those 970s to work with the 8 cores. I don't think this board is fit for 24/7 use with that FX8350, even at stock. If I go to sell this thing, then I'm probably going to downclock it and undervolt it just to make sure it's safe. I mean, look, could you imagine that thing in the background without that VRM fan and also that side panel closed in the dead heat of summer? Yeah, you'd have popcorn on your hands. Anyway, another big point to talk about too is I just came off the back of testing that X5675, and that thing absolutely floored it, even against the 8700K. It was putting up a really good fight with the GTX 1080 Ti. So if I was going to do a comparison with the FX8350, I'm thinking I'll put it up against maybe the X3470 and overclock them both, maybe to both to 4.4 gigahertz. I think that'd be a pretty fair comparison, perhaps even giving the FX8350 a little bit of an edge since it does overclock higher in absolute numbers than the FX3470 does. But anyways, the FX8350, it's a pretty decent CPU. It's not a great CPU, it's not a horrible CPU, but I think when you compare it to something like the X58 CPUs, it isn't as good, and the X58 architecture is older, and that's always been the problem pre-Ryzen. Now that Ryzen's out, that's kicking a lot of tail. It's definitely bringing a lot of competition. But if you do want to go pick up a used FX8350 system, try and get it with a decent cooler, and definitely try and get it with a 990FX motherboard that's got a decent VRM on it and better specs. A lot of those 970 motherboards, they're just not fit. I mean, if you don't see a VRM heatsink on a 970 motherboard and you want to pair it with an 8-core, just do me a favor and stay away from that thing automatically. But anyway guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, then be sure to slap that like button. Let me know in the comments section below what you think of the FX8350. A lot of people have been asking me to build more AMD pre-Ryzen systems, but today really shows the reason why. And yes, I only paired it with a GTX 780, but some of those games were on very low settings and the GPU wasn't going anywhere near 100%. So with that, we can compare that already to the FX5675 and see that it was, for example, in Far Cry Primal, it was behind. In Dota 2 as well, it was behind where the GPU wasn't getting stressed near 100% too. But anyway, those games still, you got a very enjoyable experience, and that's a big argument with the FX8350. It will get up in a lot of titles and play over 60 FPS. So of course, if you can pick it up for a bargain, and you can couple it with something like a GTX 780 like I've done here today, then you'll have happy days. Anyway guys, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye. So now we've pulled apart all these parts here, and it's actually pretty bad. So with that FX5675, or X5675, sorry, getting this FX terminology screwed up in my head, points on the single threaded performance. So I'm curious to boot up some of the same games we were playing with the FX. So we had a little problem before where the GTX 780 wasn't booting up, so you're probably wondering I had a different graphics card in there before. That was just to get everything installed, Windows updated, all the games installed, and then I was going to install this on another computer just to make sure it wasn't the GPU, and it wasn't. So it's working with the capture card now, but that's on the HDMI port. So we're going to try and change over to the display port and see if that works. But if that doesn't work, then I can still get the video done and the benchmarking done just over the HDMI port, so it's not a big deal anyway.